Some jobs make no sense. Others make you question if evolution took a lunch break. 1. The knocker-up. Before alarm clocks were cheap, people literally paid strangers to wake them up. In 19th century Britain, the knocker-up would walk around with a long stick, tapping on your window until you groaned awake. No snooze button, just a human broomstick with boundary issues. The irony? Half of them were exhausted factory workers who had to get up before dawn just to wake other exhausted factory workers. Imagine getting woken up by someone who looks sleep-deprived enough to haunt your dreams. When alarm clocks finally became affordable, the knocker-ups were forced into retirement, leaving behind one of history's most wonderfully pointless careers: professional insomnia delivery service. 2. The leech collector. In the 1800s, medicine's idea of curing everything was removing as much blood as possible. Enter the leech collector, mostly women who waded through swamps, letting the slimy little vampires latch onto their legs so doctors could treat wealthy patients. It was basically a job where you got bitten for a living and paid in diseases. Some tried using animals instead of themselves, but apparently leeches preferred the human touch. Romantic. Eventually, medical science realized maybe draining people like juice boxes wasn't ideal, and the job vanished. It's a shame. Professional blood donor to parasites would look great on a resume. 3. The full-time whipping boy. In royal courts, young princes couldn't be punished. Too noble, too delicate. So they hired another kid to get whipped for them whenever the prince messed up. That's right, one child's entire career was designated scapegoat. Imagine your boss screwing up an email and you get fired because he's too important to learn from consequences. These poor kids had to hang around royalty 24/7, waiting for their next undeserved beating. The upside? Some became lifelong friends with the princes. Trauma bonding, medieval edition. It's a role so absurd it could only exist in a system designed by people who believed divine right was a valid management policy. 4. The human alarm clock, literal edition. In industrial-era England, some factories hired an employee whose sole job was to walk the dormitories at night and personally shake workers awake when their shifts began. These human alarm clocks didn't knock on windows. They entered your room, stood over your bed, and physically shook you until you opened your eyes. It was like being woken by a ghost with union benefits. The logic was simple. Machines ran on schedule, so humans had to too. And nothing says healthy morning routine like a stranger yelling in your face at 4:30 a.m. Some even used whistles or rolled pebbles down tin pipes to wake entire floors. Imagine paying someone to replace the sound of your alarm with the trauma of a home invasion. Eventually, they were replaced by clocks and supervisors who shouted louder for free. But for decades, this job existed purely because management didn't trust workers to wake up, which, ironically, feels like every modern Monday meeting. 5. The resurrectionist. Before medical schools could legally study human anatomy, they had a supply problem. Not enough corpses. Enter the resurrectionists, professional grave robbers hired by doctors to dig up fresh bodies for research. It was the world's creepiest supply chain. Working under cover of darkness, these men, and sometimes women, would sneak into cemeteries, dig up newly buried coffins, and sell the contents by weight. Lightly used humans fetching top prices. Some universities even had hidden trapdoors to receive nightly deliveries. Grave robbing became so common that families installed iron cages, called mort safes, to guard their loved ones. The irony? The job was technically illegal, but socially tolerated because society needed science to progress, just not that close to home. Eventually, anatomy laws changed, and the resurrectionists were out of work. But for a brief macabre moment, digging up your neighbor was a respectable way to pay rent. 6. The lector, factory reader. In the early 1900s, cigar factories were some of the noisiest, dullest places on Earth. To keep workers entertained and mentally awake, companies hired a lector, a person whose only job was to sit above the factory floor and read out loud. Newspapers, novels, political pamphlets, even spicy romance chapters on Fridays. Workers paid a few cents each week to fund their in-house audiobook narrator before audiobooks existed. The lector became a cultural phenomenon, shaping opinions and sparking debates mid-shift. Imagine trying to roll cigars while someone passionately reads War and Peace through a megaphone. Factory owners eventually banned them when they realized lectors were turning workers into socialists. But for a golden few decades, one man's voice kept thousands sane. proving that even in monotonous labor, humans will always invent art, even if it's shouted over the sound of machinery and tobacco dust. 7. The pin setter, bowling alley human machinery. Before bowling alleys got automated, someone had to reset the pins, by hand, after every frame. Enter the pin setter, usually a scrawny teenager sitting at the end of the lane, dodging 16-pound projectiles flying at 20 miles per hour. The job was part janitor, part stuntman, part target practice. Pin setters earned pennies per game, inhaled shoe polish and cigarette smoke all night, and prayed the next bowler had bad aim. The system worked fine until the inevitable happened. One too many workers got concussed by rogue balls. Eventually, Brunswick invented the mechanical pin setter in the 1930s, putting thousands of human crash test dummies out of work. Still, the old-timers swore no machine could replace their reflexes, or their ability to swear creatively when hit by a strike. It's a forgotten job that perfectly sums up early 20th century logic. Why build a robot when a teenager can get paid 10 cents and lifelong back pain? 8. The switchboard operator. For nearly a century, the internet of its time ran on people, mostly women, sitting in front of massive panels, manually connecting every single phone call by plugging in cables. These switchboard operators were the unsung human routers of the 20th century, turning chaos into conversation one wire at a time. They worked at lightning speed, memorizing hundreds of connections while pretending not to overhear gossip, emergencies, or marriage proposals. Training required both technical skill and the patience of a saint because every rude caller assumed they personally controlled the entire phone network. During peak hours, operators managed hundreds of simultaneous calls, all while staying calm, polite, and upright in corsets. When automatic dialing arrived, millions lost their jobs overnight, replaced by cold metal circuits. But for decades, the switchboard operator was the beating human heart of communication, a reminder that before machines connected us, it took real people, caffeine, and an ungodly number of cables. 9. The rat catcher. Before cities had pest control departments, they had rat catchers, professional vermin hunters armed with sticks, sacks, and questionable courage. In Victorian London, rats were everywhere, in sewers, homes, and occasionally your dinner. So the government hired men to collect them, one squeaking bundle at a time. These guys were half exterminator, half showman. Some kept the live rats and sold them to rat-baiting arenas, where dogs competed to kill them for sport. Others paraded their catches through the streets like trophies, bragging about how many furry citizens they'd removed that week. They worked in dark tunnels filled with disease, getting bitten so often they practically developed a friendship with tetanus. Some even trained ferrets as assistants. Imagine a tiny, angry coworker that bites harder than your boss. When sanitation improved, the profession died out. But not before a few rat catchers became minor celebrities, known by name in newspapers. It's a strange legacy, men who fought the plague with nothing but sticks, sacks, and stubbornness, and somehow survived long enough to remind us that every city, at some point, literally had a guy whose business card could have read, "Freelance Rodent Assassin." 10. The ice cutter. Before refrigerators, someone had to deliver coldness the old-fashioned way, by carving it out of a frozen lake. Enter the ice cutter, the manliest job that somehow involved nothing but ice and misery. During brutal winters, workers in northern states and Canada trudged onto frozen lakes with giant saws, hacking perfect cubes of ice to sell in the summer. They wore layers of wool that instantly froze stiff, turning them into shivering popsicles with mustaches. Horses pulled sleds across the cracking surface, while crews hauled 1,000-pound blocks into storage barns lined with sawdust to keep them from melting. One slip meant a very permanent swim. Yet these men kept at it, turning nature's most slippery hazard into a booming business. In the 19th century, America exported ice to India, Cuba, and beyond. Literal frozen water shipped across oceans before air conditioning even existed. The invention of the electric refrigerator in the 1900s ended it all overnight, leaving entire towns of ice cutters suddenly unemployed. Still, for decades, they were the unsung heroes of human comfort, carving civilization's first ice cubes one frostbitten finger at a time. 11. The lamplighter. Imagine your job being to turn on the night. In the 1800s, before electricity, lamplighters walked through every city street at dusk, carrying long poles with small flames on the end. Their duty? Ignite each gas lamp, one by one, until the entire neighborhood glowed like a scene from a Dickens novel. They had to climb ladders, brave winter storms, and sometimes fend off thieves who thought the flame was magic. By dawn, they'd return to snuff them all out again. It was part firefighter, part night watchman, part urban magician. Kids followed them around in awe, treating them like heroes who summoned light from nothing. But it wasn't glamorous. Gas leaks, burns, and lung damage came with the territory. When electricity arrived, the job faded fast. Cities lit up at the flip of a switch, and the lamplighter became a nostalgic figure, immortalized in poetry, paintings, and even Mr. Rogers' reruns. They were the guardians of twilight, keeping the darkness at bay with nothing but a stick, a spark, and the quiet pride of knowing every night's beauty literally depended on their steps. 12. The milkman. Before grocery stores took over, the milkman was the most important stranger in your life. He knew your schedule, your habits, and probably your dog's name. Every morning he'd clink glass bottles onto your doorstep, sometimes leaving butter or cream too. The original subscription delivery service. It was efficient, sustainable, and deeply awkward when you realized your milkman knew more about your family than your neighbors did. They worked in every weather, rain, snow, heat, driving rattling trucks full of milk that spoiled if you so much as blinked at it wrong. In the 1950s, nearly every household in America relied on them, but then came supermarkets, plastic jugs, and refrigeration. The milkman's route dried up faster than warm milk on a counter. Still, his legend lingered. So much so that the milkman became a running joke in pop culture, shorthand for suburban gossip and suspiciously well-fed babies. But beneath the humor, the job represented something genuinely wholesome, a time when convenience came with a handshake. Glass bottles were washed and reused, and the day's rhythm began with the simple sound of milk hitting the porch. 13. The town crier. Before newspapers, radio, or social media, the world relied on one loud guy with a bell. The town crier was the human notification system, part journalist, part hype man, part noise pollution. Dressed in bright coats and feathered hats, they'd stand in the center of town, ring their bell, and shout the day's news, laws, and scandalous gossip. Hear ya, was basically the 1700s version of breaking news. They delivered everything from royal decrees to lost cat announcements, often with dramatic flair that would make TMZ jealous. People trusted them because they had an official seal and lungs strong enough to wake the dead. But the job was brutal, standing in all weather, shouting for hours, and dodging rotten vegetables when the news wasn't popular. As literacy spread and newspapers took over, criers became ceremonial relics, now appearing mostly at parades and Renaissance fairs. Yet their spirit lives on in every push notification and clickbait headline. After all, the town crier was just humanity's first influencer, yelling into the void, hoping someone, somewhere, would actually listen. 14. The powder monkey. On 18th and 19th century warships, not every sailor carried a sword or fired a cannon. Some were tiny, terrified teenagers called powder monkeys. Their entire job was sprinting through clouds of smoke and gunfire to deliver gunpowder from the ship's hold to the cannons above deck. They were fast, small, and expendable, basically the Navy's version of human ammunition couriers. Many were just 10 to 14 years old, dodging explosions, splinters, and angry officers who treated them like noisy pigeons. The pay? Pennies? The risk? A very fast, fiery death. Yet these kids kept ships running, crawling through narrow tunnels with barrels of powder that could turn them into confetti if someone sneezed wrong. Admirals praised their bravery, which is history's polite word for child labor under artillery fire. When naval warfare went mechanical, powder monkeys vanished, replaced by cranes, conveyor belts, and adults with actual safety equipment. But for centuries, these kids were the unsung, soot-covered heartbeat of every cannon blast that echoed across the sea. 15. The leech therapist. Before doctors knew how bodies worked, they assumed every illness could be solved by balancing the humors, which meant draining your blood. That's where leech therapists came in. These professionals, often dressed like butchers at a spa, specialized in applying hundreds of slimy little bloodsuckers to wealthy patients. The goal? Remove the bad blood. The result? Anemia and regret. Hospitals even kept leech rooms, warm, humid chambers filled with jars of wriggling employees. The best leech handlers could attach dozens in seconds, like a horrific medical pit. Crew. Some swore by the treatment for headaches, obesity, and even heartbreak. It was the 19th century version of detoxing, absurd, painful, and weirdly popular with rich people. France once imported 30 million leeches a year. Eventually, science caught up and the profession dried out, though leeches still exist in modern microsurgery, proving some bad ideas just won't die. The leech therapist may be gone, but they remain a reminder that once upon a time, you could make an honest living turning people into buffets. 16. The gong farmer. If you lived in medieval England, you didn't want to meet a gong farmer, unless your toilet overflowed. These brave or desperate souls were paid to shovel human waste out of cesspits and privies. Gong was an old word for filth, and these people waded through it nightly, armed with buckets, long poles, and no dignity. They worked after dark to spare others the smell and the sight. Their job was vital. Without them, entire cities would have drowned in their own civic output. The pay was surprisingly decent, but so was the risk. Collapsing cesspits, toxic fumes, and the occasional explosion from built-up methane. Yes, people literally blew up doing this. Society treated them like ghosts, forbidden from entering churches or public places during the day. When modern sanitation arrived, gong farmers finally retired, probably running straight for the nearest bathhouse. They may have had the worst job in history, but they also proved civilization's dirtiest secret. Progress always begins with someone willing to shovel the mess. 17. The knockout artist. In the late 1800s, when fake spiritualism swept across America, certain performers became knockout artists, hired to faint dramatically during seances to prove a ghost was present. These were not trained actors. They were people paid to pass out convincingly in candlelight, often after being lightly tapped on the shoulder by a fake psychic. Some even hid pigeons or glowing cloth under their clothes for supernatural effects. It was part theater, part scam, part accidental slapstick. Audiences gasped as chairs rattled, tables levitated, and a possessed participant face planted into the carpet. They'd wake up confused, act cleansed, and collect their pay. The job required stamina, commitment, and zero shame. But it worked. Spiritualists made fortunes while their fainting assistants perfected the art of dramatic collapse. When the public caught on, knockout artists rebranded as stage hypnotists and vaudeville performers. Their legacy? Every cheesy ghost show and overacted faint in film history owes a nod to these early masters of the well-timed swoon. 18. The funeral clown. Ancient Rome had a job so bizarre it could only exist in a society powered by wine and ego. The funeral clown. When wealthy citizens died, they hired a performer to follow the coffin, imitate the deceased's voice and gestures, and make the mourners laugh. The idea was to lighten the grief. Basically, a comedy roast with actual corpses in attendance. Some clowns danced around the body wearing masks of the dead man's face, turning funerals into surreal parades of laughter and horror. They'd crack jokes, mock the deceased's bad habits, and occasionally steal from the buffet. Romans believed this helped the spirit transition peacefully, though probably not peacefully for anyone watching. The tradition survived for centuries before being banned for undermining the dignity of death, which is ancient speak for "this is getting weird." Still, the funeral clown's legacy lives on in every awkward eulogy where someone tries to tell a joke. They were the original dark comedians, proving that even in mourning, humans can't resist one last punchline. 19. The Sin Eater. In medieval Britain and Wales, few jobs were creepier than the sin eater. When someone died, a man would be hired to sit beside the body, place a loaf of bread on the corpse's chest, and absorb its sins by eating it. Yes, literal spiritual junk removal through carbs. The belief was that every crumb transferred the dead person's misdeeds into the eater, cleansing the soul for heaven. Families paid in coins, cider, or leftovers from the funeral feast, because nothing says "thank you for swallowing Grandpa's sins" like half a pie. Sin eaters were social outcasts, shunned by the very people who hired them. After all, who wants to chat with a man full of everyone's eternal guilt? The church hated them too, calling it heresy, but villagers kept the practice alive out of superstition. It finally died out in the 19th century, leaving behind an eerie moral question. What's worse, dying with your sins or paying someone else to eat them? 20. The human computer. Before calculators, before NASA had mainframes, there were human computers, mostly women hired to perform endless mathematical calculations by hand. They charted stars, predicted tides, and mapped the heavens one equation at a time. At Harvard's observatory in the late 1800s, computers like Henrietta Swan Leavitt worked with slide rules and magnifying glasses, discovering cosmic laws while their male bosses took the credit. The work was brutal. Rows of desks, ink-stained fingers, and endless columns of numbers that could ruin your eyesight and your sanity. A single miscalculation could derail months of work, and yet their precision changed science forever. By the time NASA's early rockets launched, women like Katherine Johnson were literally doing orbital math on paper faster than machines. The title computer eventually transferred to the devices we use today, but it was human brains that first defined the term. Proof that before silicon chips there was sweat, intellect, and a stack of notebooks taller than a person. 21. The dog whipper. In medieval churches, the faithful were joined, not just by priests but by pets, mostly dogs that followed their owners inside. When those dogs started barking during sermons, the dog whipper came to the rescue. Armed with a long whip and a stick topped with a nail, his holy duty was to chase out unruly animals mid-mass. He was part bouncer, part zookeeper, and entirely unappreciated. Records show some towns even gave their dog whippers uniforms, making them official clergy security. Their biggest challenge wasn't canines, it was angry parishioners furious that someone dared touch their beloved mutt. In larger cathedrals, they upgraded to dog tongs, long poles used to grab dogs by the neck like medieval animal control. As churches modernized, pews replaced open floors, dogs were banned, and the whippers were out of work. Still, the title lingers in parish archives, a reminder that once upon a time, even God's house needed pest control. 22. The resurrection waiter. During the 18th century, fear of being buried alive was so intense that entire jobs formed around preventing it. None stranger than the resurrection waiter. Families terrified of premature burial hired men to sit beside freshly dug graves for days, listening for any sign the deceased might still be renting the coffin. Equipped with bells, tubes, and shovels, these grim attendants were paid to stay awake and, if needed, perform a hasty exhumation. Cemeteries even installed safety coffins with strings leading to above-ground bells, hence the phrase "saved by the bell." Some waiters became local celebrities, claiming they'd successfully rescued the living dead. Of course, most were just bored men drinking ale beside corpses, praying nothing actually moved. The job vanished as medicine advanced and people stopped mistaking comas for death. Still, the resurrection waiter remains one of history's most morbidly hilarious gigs. Proof that nothing says job security like waiting for someone not to wake up. 23. The professional mourner. In ancient Egypt, Rome, and even Victorian England, some funerals were too quiet, so families hired professional mourners to fix that. These dramatic performers wept, wailed, tore their clothes, and collapsed theatrically to show how deeply loved the deceased was. The more mourners, the higher your social status. Some women became famous for their ability to cry on command. Others used onions, not emotions. They'd compete for volume, leading to funerals that sounded less like grief and more like an opera rehearsal. Victorian mourners even rented black veils and sobbed at multiple funerals a day, grief on commission. The job slowly died out as society decided sincerity looked better than performance art, though some cultures still practice it today. It's proof that for centuries, even sadness had a price tag, and someone was always willing to fake heartbreak for a paycheck. When you can't cry for yourself, there's always someone who'll do it for a fee.